My parents kicked me out of the house at 14 because I was a poor student, but when I grew up and became successful, they started to take all my achievements for themselves. I'm Logan, 27M. My parents kicked me out when I was 14 years old because I wasn't getting straight A's. Yes, you read that right. We've been living in the US for 2 generations, but my parents still refuse to adapt to a modern parenting style. They had one obsession: academic excellence. If I wasn't acing every subject, I was a failure in their eyes. My entire childhood was a nightmare because of their unrealistic expectations. To make things worse, I had an older sister, Sophia, 28F, who was a straight-A student. Since she always topped her class, I was constantly compared to her. It wasn't just at home. Teachers, relatives, and even neighbors would point out the difference between us. When I was in elementary school, things weren't so bad. I was a decent student, mostly getting A's and B's. But that wasn't enough. Sophia graduated elementary school with a perfect score and was the top student in our district. Meanwhile, my A's and B's weren't even in the top 10 of my class. That was the beginning of my parents' disappointment. By the time I hit middle school, my parents had turned up the pressure. Every time I got my exam results, they would sit me down with Sophia's old grade sheets and compare them to mine. If I scored lower than her, which I always did, my parents lost their minds. With every dip in my grades, my parents' rage intensified. My once B's and A's dropped to B's and C's, and that was unacceptable in their eyes. Their punishments escalated. They did everything except physically hitting me. Forced me to kneel for hours without food or water. Starved me the night before exams so I would focus better. Confiscated my video games and locked me inside the house for weeks before exams. Refused to buy me snacks, treats, or anything I liked, telling me if you want it, get good grades first. Eventually, I just stopped asking for anything, knowing I wouldn't get it. Their favorite punishment was locking me in the basement for hours, forcing me to reflect on my grades. No proper light, no fresh air, just me and my books. At the time, I thought this was normal. I assumed all parents did this. My parents own a small grocery store in a backstreet. They weren't poor, but they acted like they were one step away from homelessness. Their mindset came from my grandparents. My grandfather worked as a day laborer, and my grandmother was a janitor when they first immigrated. They worked 2 jobs each just to raise my father and his 2 brothers. My dad had to drop out of school at 11 to support the family. My mom's family had a similar story. She worked since she was a teenager to help out at home. Together, my parents worked tirelessly in their 20s to save money and open their grocery store. To them, education was the only way out of poverty. They believed that good grades equals financial success and bad grades equals a life of suffering. The irony? We weren't struggling financially. But their scarcity mindset made them believe they had to hoard every penny, sacrifice every comfort, and push their kids to be perfect to survive. What they didn't understand was that times had changed. At 14, I entered high school, and I had had enough. I realized that no matter how hard I tried, I could never be like Sophia. I struggled with memorization but was naturally good at problem solving. Subjects like math and logic-based courses were fine, but anything that required rote learning was a nightmare. As my parents' punishments got worse, my grades slipped further. So, I decided. If I'm going to be treated like a failure, I might as well act like one. I skipped classes. I spent hours outside instead of studying. I wrote jokes and song lyrics on my exam papers, just to piss off my parents. They responded by grounding me harder. Locked me in the basement every weekend. Confiscated all my books and video games. Forced me to study non-stop. But I was smarter than them. My parents left early every morning for the grocery store and didn't come home until late at night. So, when they thought I was locked up at home studying, I was actually outside playing, making friends, and doing whatever I wanted. When they found out, they took me to the store on weekends and summers as punishment. But guess what? I loved it. I loved interacting with customers, helping them decide what to buy, and working the cash register. I enjoyed sales and marketing. But my parents? They were furious. They didn't want me to run a grocery store. That's not a respectable job. You need to become a doctor or an engineer. When I jokingly said, I think I'd be a great salesman, they flipped out. Sales is for people with no education. You're wasting your life. At that moment, I realized. My parents were never going to accept me for who I was. I went into full rebellion mode. And then, in my freshman year, I got the worst grade possible, an F-. I had to repeat the year. That was unforgivable to my parents. They snapped. They told me I was a disgrace to the family and that I had humiliated them beyond repair. Then they said something I never expected. You are no longer our son. Get out of our house. You're on your own. And just like that, at 14 years old, I was homeless. I stood outside my house, staring at the locked door, still trying to process what had just happened. I was 14 years old, alone, and had nowhere to go. I didn't have any friends because my parents never let me socialize. I wasn't allowed to go to birthday parties, have sleepovers, or even play sports after school. The only places I knew were school, home, and the grocery store. I had no plan, no money, and no idea what to do next. The first night, I slept on a park bench. At first, it was terrifying. But when the initial shock wore off, I felt something unexpected. Freedom. For the first time in my life, I wasn't being controlled. I wasn't being yelled at for not studying. I wasn't being compared to Sophia. I was on my own, and somehow, that felt better than being at home. The next morning, I walked downtown, looking for work. I had zero qualifications, but I knew I was good at sales. I started going store to store, asking if they had any job openings. Most managers laughed at me. A 14-year-old kid with no experience, no resume, and no address? They weren't going to hire me. After nearly a dozen rejections, I finally found a small beauty store that needed an extra hand. The owner, Mia, was in her 40s and ran the store with her daughter. She was skeptical, but she needed help immediately. She gave me a test. If you can convince that customer over there to buy this lipstick as an add-on, I'll hire you. I didn't hesitate. I walked up to a woman who was only buying night cream and started talking. I asked her about her skin routine, complimented her choice, and casually mentioned that a lipstick in a matching shade would complete her look. Somehow, she bought it. Mia was impressed. She said, "All right, kid. You're hired." Mia couldn't pay much, but she let me sleep in the storage room at the back of the store. The pay was low, but I didn't care. I had a roof over my head and was making a little money. Over the next few months, I learned everything about sales. How to upsell products. How to handle difficult customers. How to increase revenue without changing prices. I also realized something. I was really good at selling. Unlike Sophia, who was great at memorization, I had a natural gift for persuasion. After 6 months, I wanted more. I started job hopping, looking for better opportunities. Every new job paid a little better and taught me a little more. By 17, I was working at a telemarketing company, selling credit cards. By 19, I was making more money than most people my age. Turning down college for something bigger. One of my managers, Ethan, saw potential in me. He offered to pay for my college if I continued working for his company. It was a huge opportunity. Most people in my situation would have taken it. But I had other plans. I wanted to start my own business. I had spent years selling for other people. Now, I wanted to sell for myself. At 21, I took a huge risk. I quit my job and started my own company, providing sales and marketing services for small businesses. It was tough at first. I started with just 5 employees and 1 client, a company that sold mattresses and pillows. But I knew how to close deals. Within a year, we had multiple clients. By year 3, we were making 6 figures annually. By year 5, we had 50+ clients and over 200 employees. We weren't just selling mattresses anymore. We were closing sales for insurance companies, credit card firms, beauty brands, and tech startups. My company was now handling millions in sales every year. I had everything my parents said I would never achieve. I was successful, wealthy, and independent, without a college degree, without their help, and without their approval. After years of silence, my mother suddenly appeared in my life again. She started following me on social media, liking my old posts, and commenting things like, "So proud of you, son." I ignored her. Then she messaged me directly. "I miss you. Come home. Let's be a family again. I left her on read. Then the texts kept coming. She went on and on about how proud they were of me and how they always believed I would succeed. Yeah, right. I could see through her. She wasn't proud of me. She was just shocked that the kid they abandoned was now making more money than they had in their entire lives. I told my girlfriend, Rachel, about the messages. She said, "Don't fall for it. They're going to try to guilt-trip you into giving them money." I wasn't sure. A part of me still wanted revenge. I wanted to go back, show off my success, and make them regret everything. Then, my mother sent the final text that changed everything. "We're hosting a family dinner. Your dad wants to see you. He wants to apologize. Please come." I knew this was a trap. But I also knew this was my chance to get even. I said, "Sure, I'll be there." Mom told me to wear something nice and be on time. I did the opposite. I showed up 2 hours late, wearing a gym sweatshirt, trekking shorts, and a baseball cap. To them, dressing casually at a formal event was a huge insult. When I finally walked in, I saw that this wasn't just a small family dinner. They had invited relatives, friends, and even business associates. And guess what? My parents were bragging about my success. They were telling everyone that my achievements were because of their strict parenting. They took all the credit for shaping me into a good man. That's when I lost it. "Oh yeah? You guys threw me out on the streets and said I'd end up homeless. Remember that?" The room went silent. Then my aunt, who had always been blunt, said, "Wait, didn't you guys disown him?" I laughed out loud and clapped. My parents' faces turned pale. But that was just the beginning. I stood in the middle of that restaurant rooftop, surrounded by family, friends, and relatives, while my parents sat there shamelessly taking credit for my success. They were acting like they had always believed in me. Like they had supported me. Like they hadn't thrown me out to survive on my own when I was just 14 years old. My outspoken aunt, who had always been a little too real for family gatherings, had already dropped the first bomb. "Wait, didn't you guys disown him?" Everyone turned to look at my parents. They froze for a second, but they quickly recovered. My dad let out an awkward laugh, waving his hand dismissively. "Ah, that was just tough love. We knew he'd find his way. We wanted to teach him responsibility." Tough love? I was 14, homeless, sleeping on a park bench. At that moment, all the grief, anger, and pain I had buried for years boiled over. I wasn't going to let them rewrite history. I stepped forward, lifted my glass, and smiled. "You're right, Dad. Kicking your 14-year-old son onto the streets with no money, no food, and nowhere to go was definitely tough love." The room fell silent. My mom tried to interrupt, but I kept going. "You always knew I'd find my way." "That's funny, because I distinctly remember you saying I'd end up a homeless drug addict. That I was a disgrace to this family. That I was mentally unfit because I couldn't score straight A's." Some relatives gasped. A few guests whispered. My parents looked horrified. They weren't expecting me to air all their dirty laundry in front of everyone. But I wasn't done yet. I laughed, shaking my head. "Remember how you starved me before exams so I could focus better? Or how you locked me in the basement for hours as punishment for getting a B?" A few people turned to my sister, Sophia, who was sitting there silent, eyes down. I looked straight at her. "Sophia, tell me I'm lying." She didn't say a word. She just sat there, blinking rapidly, trying not to cry. That was all the confirmation the room needed. I turned back to my parents. "But you're right. I do owe my success to you. You know why? Because kicking me out was the best thing you ever did for me. The moment you slammed that door shut, I became free." My dad looked furious, but he was trying to keep his composure in front of all the guests. "Logan, we did what we thought was best for you. We raised you with discipline. And look where you are now. You should be thanking us." I laughed out loud, shaking my head. "You're right. Maybe every parent here should do the same. Maybe all of you should starve your kids, lock them in basements, and throw them out onto the streets. Because, apparently, that's the secret to success." At this point, some guests looked uncomfortable. A few relatives had their arms crossed, staring at my parents like they were seeing them for the first time. My mom wiped fake tears, playing the victim. "Logan, we love you. We were just trying to push you to do your best." I smirked. "Love? You called me a failure every single day for years. You made me feel like I wasn't even worth the air I breathed." Mom turned to the guests, trying to save face. "He's just upset. He doesn't understand how hard we worked to give him a good life." I leaned forward, looking her straight in the eye. "No, Mom. I worked hard to give myself a good life. You just tried to destroy it." That's when Sophia, who had been silent this whole time, finally spoke. "Mom, stop." Everyone turned to look at her. Her voice was small, but there was anger in her eyes. "Logan's right. You didn't raise us. You controlled us. You locked us in the house, cut us off from friends, and forced us to live like prisoners because you cared more about grades than our happiness." My mom's jaw dropped. "You always told me that I'd have a perfect life if I just obeyed. That all I needed was good grades. Well, guess what? I did everything you asked, and look where I am now. I can't even get a job because I have zero social skills. I don't know how to talk to people. I don't even know who I am outside of being a perfect student." A few relatives shook their heads, looking at my parents with disappointment. One of my uncles whispered, "Damn, they really did a number on these kids." My mom burst into fake tears, while my dad sat there red-faced, looking like he wanted to punch a wall. Then Sophia turned to me. "Logan. I'm sorry. I wasn't expecting that." She swallowed hard, still avoiding eye contact. "I should have stood up for you. I should have told them to stop. But I was so scared of disappointing them that I let them ruin your life. I let them ruin mine, too." For the first time in my life, I saw it. The guilt. The regret. And I realized that my sister wasn't my enemy. She was just as much a victim as I was. I put a hand on her shoulder and nodded. "It's not your fault, Sophia." Cutting them off for good. After that night, my parents never contacted me again. And I never reached out. I blocked my mom on everything. She tried a few times, using different numbers, but I ignored her every time. My dad? He never even tried. His pride wouldn't allow it. Sophia and I stayed in touch. I offered her a job at my company, hoping to help her develop the confidence she never got growing up. She took personality development classes, but the damage was deep. She was still struggling, but at least she was trying. And for the first time in her life, she was making her own choices. As for me, I moved on. I built my company into a multi-million-dollar empire. I surrounded myself with people who actually cared about me. And every time I looked back at my past, I felt nothing for my parents. No regret. No sadness. Just relief. Because I had finally done what they always told me was impossible. I had succeeded, not because of them, but despite them. And that? That was the best revenge of all. Thank you for watching the video. Like it if you watched the video to the end and don't forget to subscribe. Have a nice day.